Hi everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel Dr. Srinivas Medical Concepts and my FB page Dr. Srinivas Concepts. This is Dr. Srinivas, neurologist from Andhra Pradesh, India. I am also the medical author of the book Focused Neurology. Today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic, the pediatric neurology. The pediatric neurology in nutshell. Pediatric neurology is a very broad specialty, and pediatric epilepsy plays a major part of pediatric neurology, and therefore a separate video has been made on pediatric epilepsy which I have already uploaded it. The viewers can kindly refer it for pediatric epilepsy. So today we shall discuss pediatric neurology in nutshell. All pediatric neurological disorders other than epilepsy, other than pediatric epilepsy. So pediatric neurology in nutshell. The first and foremost disorder we should discuss is cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy. But what is cerebral palsy? Cerebral palsy is a non-progressive disturbances that occurred in the developing fetus or the infant brain. So cerebral palsy is a non-progressive, very important. It's a non-progressive disturbances that occurred in the developing brain or the infant brain. And the most common causes of cerebral palsy are prematurity and low birth weight. I repeat, the most important and common causes of cerebral palsy are prematurity and low birth weight, and not hypoxemia as usually thought of. The most common causes still are prematurity and low birth weight. Cerebral palsy is basically a disorder of motor function. They have disturbances of motor function. So the clinical manifestations are, since the corticospinal tracts are affected bilaterally, the tone of the adductor muscles of the lower limb gets affected. So there is hypertonia of the adductor muscles of the lower limb, and therefore when they walk, the adductor goes like this, and the right limb adductor also crosses. So they cross and then walk. It's like scissors. That's why it is known as scissoring gait. Scissoring gait is because of hypertonia of adductor muscles of both the lower limbs because of the corticospinal tract involvement on both sides. Second, generally when the brain is immature, there will be primitive reflexes. But once the brain starts maturing, usually after 6 months, these primitive reflexes disappear. It indicates that the brain is maturing. And therefore in cerebral palsy, when there is a non-progressive disturbances of the brain, and the brain does not mature, these primitive reflexes persist. They don't disappear. So it indirectly implies that the brain has not matured. Obviously, with so much of derangement of brain function, there will be intellectual disability. The types of cerebral palsies are, the most common is spastic type. That is an increase in tone, hypertonia. It is about 70%. It can either result in a hemiplegia or diplegia or quadriplegia. The next common is involvement of the basal ganglionic structures also. So dyskinetics, so they'll have chorioathetoid movements and dystonia. Then they can have hypotonia or a mixed picture. Treatment, nothing much can be done. Because the cortex is affected, there will be a lot of seizures, so we have to give anticonvulsant drugs. And for spasticity, we can give GABAergic drugs like baclofen. So cerebral palsy is a very important and one of the common disorders of pediatric neurology. Next we shall discuss spinal dysraphism. What is spinal dysraphism? It is the failure of the normal closure of the neural tube. The brain and the spinal cord structures are formed from the neural tube. We have anterior pore from which the brain develops and the posterior pore from which the spinal cord develops. They need to close. Then only they get enclosed, the brain or the spinal cord. If the anterior port does not close, the brain cannot get enclosed, it may come out encephalocele, or the surrounding bone structures may not be formed anencephaly. Or if the posterior port does not close, the meninges and the spinal cord can come out, myelomeningocele. So basically spinal dysraphism is the failure of the normal closure of the neural tube. So if the anterior port does not close, as an involvement of the brain may come out, resulting in anencephaly. If the posterior port does not close, the spinal cord cannot get enclosed, so spinal cord will come out, what we call as myelomeningocele. If it is mild, we call it as spina bifida. So failure of the normal closure of the neural tube during embryological development, along with the overlying skin and bony structures, and therefore we see skin manifestations like dimple or tuft of hair and bony defects also. So the etiology is basically because of the folic acid deficiency. So we advised pregnant women to take folic acid, and from the neurologist point of view, if by unknowingly or unknowingly, if we give sodium valproate as an anti-epileptic drug for pregnant women, it can cause folic acid deficiency. And one of the important causes of neural tube defects is the administration of sodium valproate, an anti-epileptic drug, which can cause folic acid deficiency. And then trisomy 13 or trisomy 18, or a history of neural tube defects in a sibling. The diagnosis is we can do ultrasound, or we can estimate the alpha fetoprotein. Normally what happens is the alpha fetoprotein is inside, and once the anterior port or posterior port are closed, the amniotic fluid the alpha fetoprotein cannot enter outside. But if the anterior port or the posterior port does not close, the alpha fetoprotein enters, and therefore there is an increased level of alpha fetoprotein either in the amniotic fluid or the serum, because the anterior port and the posterior port do not close. So since they do not close, the alpha fetoprotein comes out, and there's an increase of alpha fetoprotein in amniotic fluid or serum. So one of the important diagnostic features of neural tube defects is, one is ultrasound, second an increase in the alpha fetoprotein either in the serum or the amniotic fluid, the maternal serum or the amniotic fluid. Treatment, not much can be done. We can do surgery, try to close the defects. Right, next very important topic is infantile hydrocephalus. The hydrocephalus is an accumulation of the CSF and the dilatation of the ventricles. So the etiology, commonly what we encounter in pediatric neurology, the infantile hydrocephalus, one of the common causes is the congenital cerebral aqueduct stenosis. The cerebral aqueduct can completely close or not fully open, so that the CSF cannot transgress, and therefore there is accumulation of CSF fluid. So one of the important causes of infantile hydrocephalus is cerebral aqueduct stenosis. Second is the Dandy-Walker syndrome. The Dandy-Walker syndrome is the outflow obstruction to the fourth ventricle. So there is an outflow obstruction to the fourth ventricle, and there can be associated failure of the development of the cerebellar vermis. So Dandy-Walker syndrome. And third is the Arnold-Chiari malformation, where the descent of the cerebellar structures, herniation of the cerebellar structures into the foramen magnum. Sometimes even the brainstem structures, lower brainstem structures also can enter the foramen magnum. So Arnold-Chiari malformation, where the cerebellum or the lower brain structures can enter to the foramen magnum and can obstruct the CSF transport. Or the Dandy-Walker syndrome, again obstruction where the CSF cannot enter into the fourth ventricle, or the aqueductal stenosis. These are the important causes of infantile hydrocephalus. The clinical features are the progressive enlargement of the head. Because of the accumulation of the CSF, the brain and the head starts enlarging, but fortunately the sutures can give away to a certain extent, and so the raised intracranial pressure to a certain extent can be slowed down. In fact, the papilledema is not that commonly seen in infantile hydrocephalus, because unlike adults where the bones cannot expand further, so the pressure will go on to the optic nerve and resulting in early papilledema in adults. But in children, the papilledema is not seen, or if at all it is seen, it's a very late manifestation, because the bones sutures do not close, and therefore they can give away and accommodate this extra brain volume and the CSF volume, and therefore the compression of the optic nerve does not happen. Even if it happens, it's going to be very late. So papilledema is not an early manifestation of infantile hydrocephalus, unlike adult hydrocephalus. Second is the sunset sign. Because there is accumulation of CSF, the third ventricle, it can go and impinge on the midbrain structures, the top of the midbrain. You have the vertical gaze centers in the midbrain. The up gaze fibers cross and then descend, whereas the down gaze fibers descend straight away. And therefore, when there is CSF accumulation, it goes and impinges on the top of the midbrain, where the up gaze fibers, where the crossing up gaze fibers get affected. So since the crossing up gaze fibers get affected, they cannot look upwards, they'll be only looking downwards. This is known as setting sun sign. And third, obviously, because the CSF is going and expanding and compressing the brain structures, the brain gets affected, there will be delayed development, there could be seizures also. The treatment is ventriculoperitoneal shunting. Take the CSF fluid from the ventricles and we can put it into the peritoneum, because there is no overlying bone on the abdomen, and therefore abdomen can expand a lot and accommodate this extra CSF, unlike in the skull and the cranium where the bones cannot expand. So we take the fluid from the ventricles and put it into the peritoneum, what we call as VP shunt, ventriculoperitoneal shunt. But then it can, on a long-term basis, it can result in obstruction and infections. So we need to be careful. Or we can do finally surgery. So this is about the infantile hydrocephalus. The next topic, what we'll talk about is the cerebral structural anomalies. There are many anomalies, but one of the common anomalies, cerebral structural anomalies, what we see is the porencephalic cyst. It communicates with the ventricles. The next is the intrauterine infections. The common intrauterine infections, what we come across are the rubella and the neurosyphilis. Rubella and the syphilis. In the rubella, congenital rubella, they have characteristic features. They can have cataract, they can have hearing loss, they can have congenital heart disease, and then the cataract, hearing loss, and the congenital heart disease. And if syphilis also can affect intrauterine infection, syphilis, it can result in the deformed teeth, again deafness, and the interstitial keratitis. So rubella causes learning difficulties, cataracts, hearing loss, and congenital heart disease, and syphilis causes deafness, interstitial keratitis, and deformed teeth. Next common pediatric condition what we are going to consider is the basal ganglia involvement. Basal ganglia involvement in pediatric age group occurs usually in two disorders. One is the Huntington's disease, second is the Wilson's disease. Huntington's disease usually affects the caudate nucleus. You can see the caudate atrophy. It results in a triad of progressive dementia, autosomal dominant inheritance, and chorea. So it's a progressive chorea, progressive dementia. There will be a lot of personality changes. In fact, suicide tendencies and committing suicide is not that uncommon in Huntington's disease. Next is Wilson's disease. It also affects the basal ganglia and the liver structures. It is basically an autosomal recessive disorder of copper metabolism. There is a copper transport protein deficiency, and hence copper gets accumulated in the basal ganglia and the liver. It causes the liver being affected, resulting in jaundice. Basal ganglia gets affected. They'll have all kinds of movement disorders. They can have the characteristic KF ring, Kayser-Fleischer rings, which can be picked up by slit lamp examination. Treatment is copper chelating agents like penicillamine. The cerebellum, one of the common cerebellar disorders which we encounter in pediatric age group is Friedreich's ataxia. There is a spinocerebellar degeneration, peripheral nerves gets affected, corticospinal tract gets affected. So they'll have increased the extensor plantar response. They'll have the extensor plantar response. Friedreich's ataxia is basically an autosomal recessive disease. They'll have progressive ataxia. They'll have the extensor plantar response. Because the peripheral nerves are involved, they can have the reflexes being diminished. and they usually have the skeletal deformities like kyphos, scoliosis, and pes cavus. Any long-standing disease, especially chronic neuropathies, will cause skeletal abnormalities and foot abnormalities. They cause kyphoscoliosis. It is because of the unequal weakness of the paravertebral muscles. So when there is a long-standing problem like hereditary neuropathy, there will be unequal weakness of paravertebral muscles resulting in kyphoscoliosis. Likewise, there will be unequal weakness of the foot muscles resulting in pes cavus and high arched foot. So Friedreich's attacks is a long-standing disease. There will be peripheral neuropathy, so they'll have bony changes, kyphoscoliosis and pes cavus. Sometimes they can have cardiomyopathy also. Right. Next we see the corticospinal tract involvement. The common condition what we see in pediatric age group is hereditary spastic paraplegia. They have progressive spastic paraparesis. They have scissoring gait. Then optic nerve involvement. The common condition is Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. They have optic disease resulting in visual failure. The anterior horn cells can get affected. It is also motor neuron disease, but a type of motor neuron disease where the anterior horn cells are affected on a genetic background. So we call this as spinal muscular atrophies. If we see this in adult, we call it as progressive muscular atrophy. But if we see in children in the pediatric age group, it could have a genetic basis, and we call it as spinal muscular atrophy, SMA. We have basically two groups. One is the Wernicke-Hoffmann disease. It is an infantile form. It is usually fatal. Then you have in an adult or the adolescent age group, Kugelberg-Wilander. It is seen in adolescent or adult group, where it is not that fatal as it is in the Wernicke-Hoffmann's group. Then we have the peripheral neuropathy being affected. We have the Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, the hereditary motor sensory neuropathy. As I said, when there's a long-standing hereditary neuropathy, the spine and the foot gets affected. So they'll have kyphoscoliosis, they have pes cavus. And in hereditary neuropathy, usually it is a demyelinative in nature, so the conduction velocity gets affected. And very characteristic, the anterior lateral muscles of the lower limb gets affected. So the thigh muscles are big, but when it comes to the leg muscles, they become very small. So it is like an inverted champagne bottle appearance, very characteristic of Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. They'll have skeletal diseases like kyphoscoliosis and foot abnormalities also. Muscles, the muscles can get affected. Usually they'll have proximal muscle involvement. They'll have Govers say that is difficult in getting up from the squatting to the standing position. Common conditions what we see, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, sometimes Becker's muscular dystrophy. So muscular dystrophies are very common. Then we can have congenital myopathies. Then we can have mitochondrial myopathies also. But dystrophies are very common. Rag red fibers is one of the characteristic findings of mitochondrial myopathies. And finally, we have the neurogenetic tumor syndromes, basically neurocutaneous syndromes. Basically, when we talk about the neurocutaneous syndromes or the neurogenetic tumor syndromes on a genetic background, basically the brain, eye, skin, usually they get affected together. Brain and skin, they get affected together because these structures, both the brain and skin, arise from ectoderm. And therefore, in the neurogenetic disorders, the neurocutaneous syndrome, where since the ectoderm gives rise to both the brain and the skin structures, when there's a disease of the ectoderm, both the manifestations are seen both on the brain as well as on the skin. So we call it as a neurocutaneous disorders. Neurofibromatosis 1, neurofibromatosis 2, tuberous sclerosis. Then we have the von Hippel-Lindorff disease. So these are all the common pediatric neurological disorders we see. These are the common neurological disorders we encounter in pediatrics. And another important subspecialty of pediatric neurology is pediatric epilepsy. A video on pediatric epilepsy has been already done. The viewers are requested kindly to follow Pediatric Epilepsy in Nutshell, the former video. This is pediatric neurology in nutshell. So I've tried to cover most of the pediatric neurological disorders in this video, other than pediatric epilepsy, which is covered by former video. So this is an overview of pediatric neurology, the pediatric neurology in nutshell. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my lecture. If you have any suggestions or comments, kindly post onto my YouTube channel. But please like and subscribe my YouTube channel, Dr. Srinivas Medical Concepts, and my FB page, Dr. Srinivas Concepts. Thank you. Bye.